So cool. Hey everyone. Just wanted to welcome you this afternoon. We're back today to have another conversation when it comes to some of the racial issues going on around our country right now. And I finally, after, was it 4 years? 4 years, been able to get Cedric Lewis in here, dude. I have wanted you in here for so long. And as we start off, I just want you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Um, as I said, this is not something I like to do. By way of background, as I said, I was born and raised in Florida, lived there most of my life. I've been a transplant here for about 7, 8 years. I've lived in Western Pennsylvania, um, which I think is a testament to uh, God's plan versus our plans. Western Pennsylvania was not on my life radar. Um, I was an attorney for a number of years. Um, and Now I own several companies, um, startup companies that I work with. I'm probably most known locally for being an adjunct professor at Grove City College, where I teach in both the entrepreneurship department and the business department, teaching everything from teaching everything from business law to music business, some constitutional law classes I've taught, property rights, some other things like that. Uh, and 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 so I've been doing that for about 7 years. Grove City is my wife is an alumnus of Grove City College, which is one of the reasons that got me up here to Western Pennsylvania. Um, uh, I guess that part of my life is also somewhat interesting. As I said, I'm married with an interracial marriage with what we have now 9 children. When I met my wife, she had adopted 4 children, was fostering another 2, would go on to adopt those 2, foster a number of children. I think it was something like 18 or 19 children over the course of her life. And then I had 2 children, and now we have a 9-month-old. And so our family is certainly multiracial. The other thing from the kids being most of the kids being biracial, and then the twins who are blue-eyed blonde, as I call them every day. Those are my crazy white boys. And so, but I'm dad, and that's kind of how that is. So I think that uh, more than anything else, that's kind of me in a nutshell. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a Christian. I try my best to follow those things that I teach, and past that, I'm just an ordinary guy. I like a little football, I like a little wrestling. What else is there to tell?
Yeah, so far though, so far from ordinary. I mean, so we've sat many times and had conversations, and
Yeah.
just hearing some of the stuff about your upbringing
hmm
is amazing. Things your grandmother has challenged you to in grocery stores. What was that again? What did she do to you that one time?
Um, my grandmother, in general, is was a woman of a work of art. She was very determined and adamant with us growing up that she would not raise lazy grandboys. That was always her thing. And so this is a woman who taught us from uh, probably 5 or 6. I could cook, I could clean, I could iron, I could, do most of those things. She wanted to make sure that we could always do those things. That was something that was challenged. But she's the head of the family. She's the head of the family, and she raised us with kind of the iron fist. Even until she lived into her 90s. My grandmother was always the one who was in charge, and she used to joke. She was when I'm too old to chase you with a switch, then you better have the respect to come over here and bend over so that I can hit you in the switch. So even sitting in the wheelchair at 94, you say something out of line. Come over here so I can smack you, and you better come, and you better lean, because you didn't want her chase you in that wheelchair. And I've seen her chase my cousin down the side of a highway if we're not doing something down the side of I-75. So, but being raised in that type of environment um, was fantastic for me. And so my parents were there and raised us. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, but I got a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom and appreciation for other things that I don't think I normally would have as a young child if I hadn't spent as much time with them as I did. And my grandfather was a Baptist pastor for 20, 30 years, um, as long as I can remember. And I grew up in a family of pastors. to this day, and pastors and bishops, and so that has always been a part of my life with my family. You know, we are followers of Christ, and so I've tried to let that guide the things that I've done. You know, sometimes like everybody else, I think sometimes I do a better job than others, and I have my moments like everybody else has. But I try to at least make that be my demon side. I'm not sure what I'm sure I missed some story, but
Oh, I'll bring it up later. It's an awesome story, and it's going to apply eventually. But that's great because your grandmother had a major influence on your life.
Yeah, my grandparents did. I think if anything, I've been blessed with the family that I have. You know, from my grandparents, my parents, my aunts, my uncles, and on down. Each one of them has had a tremendous impact on me growing up. For my generation of children, of the grandkids, I was the baby growing up, and now of course my sisters now are younger, and there's a group of younger kids that all kind of grew up together. But for my generation, I was the baby, and so everyone kind of doted on me to a sense, and then had these great conversations with me as well, and they still do. You know, there's a certain aunt and cousin that I call on when I need prayer, or I need to talk about scripture, because that's their goal. And I have another aunt who is Jehovah's Witness, and no one else in the family is. But at the same time, theology aside, is one of the strongest people of faith I've ever met. And so she's the one that encouraged me to when you find your path and you find what you believe on, she's the one that instituted that. You stick with that, and you stick by that, and you don't let anyone take you off your path of your faith and what you believe. And that's one of those things that I got from her. And so I've just been very lucky and blessed with the family that I have.
Yes. And where exactly did you grow up?
I grew up in Polk County, Florida, Central Florida, which is maybe about 35, 40 minutes from Disney. It is the home of Legoland. Cypress Gardens was there before Legoland, which was the first theme park in the state of Florida. And from my understanding, the Polk family owned that, were friends or knew the Disney brothers, and actually were the reason we got Disney World in Orlando. They kind of told them about that area. And so it is a land of citrus barons and cattle barons, and a lot of the leadership of the state of Florida in terms of the state house and senators come from there. Catherine Harris is from there, and actually when I practiced law, those families were clients of my law firm that I worked at. So,
And what was it like for you growing up in Florida?
growing up in Florida, when I did, it's kind of a mixed bag. On the one hand, I loved my childhood. I was, we weren't wealthy, but we didn't know it. We knew, there were some different things. I grew up in a time where my parents encouraged me to kind of be friends with everyone, and that was kind of always my mentality. I kind of gravitated to people. And so I grew up, doing the normal things that kids in my area did, and you played hide and go seek in the orange groves, and you went to the recreation center during the summer and were in the pool, and you went to the complex and doing those things. And so that was always one part of my life. I also grew up in a county that is known for, I think as a child, one of the sheriff was associated with a grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And so that was also a part of my life that I kind of knew about too. And so I knew that this thing was out there, this idea of race and kind of separatism was out there. Was one of those things that I also kind of questions as I got older. Well, why is this like this and why is this like that? And as someone growing up in the church, and as I got older and spent more time with friends of mine that weren't black, and seeing the differences in kind of their lives and cultures and thought patterns, that was also why? I can remember being in high school, and one of my best friends, my oldest friends I've known since 5th grade, I remember going to his house, and kind of in some parts being in awe and looking at things, and to this day, I talked to him, and I talked to his parents. I love them to death. They're great people. But he goes, I'm pretty sure you're still the only black person who's ever been to that house. And like I said, nothing's ever been said to me of the world, but that was kind of the way that area was. Some people stayed here, and some people stayed there, and sometimes there wasn't a lot of mixing. And then as I got older, you would see a little bit more of that, and some of that was a cultural thing with the teenagers and stuff. But there were some lines that you just kind of saw, and so that was another part of my life. Mm-hmm. But growing up, my friends were always kind of mixed racially, and there were things I did with my black friends, there were things that I did with my white friends, and learning to navigate those things as I got older, in some ways, kind of became second nature. Mm-hmm. And I guess in some ways it served me in that even now when I kind of deal with some of these things, and people go, well, didn't you notice this or you noticed that? I'm, well, yeah, I did, but it's always kind of how some things have been with me, and so I've had to learn when are the times that I speak out, and when are the times that I react to things, and when are the times that I simply let it go as to what it is, or I consider the source and go, that's not worth it. That was kind of growing up in, the end part of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s, and I'm 47 now. And so I grew up kind of that multi-generational thing, but that was kind of a hotbed of I think awakening culturally. I got to see some of the changes that happened racially. I got to see the effects of I guess the cultural differences in how people viewed certain events in our lives. Mm-hmm. I grew up during a time. I grew up during the Reagan era. For instance, and so now I teach at a school that are devotees of Reagan. And I go, he did some great things, and this is one of the best economic presidents we ever had. And I go, well, I understand that now because I've studied economics, I've studied the path of that. But I said I also remember growing up in that time, and I know that's not a true statement for everybody in America. And so those were the things that kind of opened my eyes up to certain things too. And so I would say that, our opinions and how we live and how we react to some things are based on our experiences. Mm-hmm. And so I've also been lucky enough to look at those experiences from other people and take that into account. And I don't think we do enough of that.
Yeah.
We fixate on our experience and think that's the only version of that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a mistake. I think it's harmed us. I think it separated us a lot. But I also think it leads to a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of what I said, kind of putting your head in the sand, because this is my sandbox and my kind of little world over here, and everything outside of this has to be like this because that's the way it is in here. Mm-hmm. And we forget that there's a sandbox over there that's different, that's in a different makeup, and it's heated differently, and it has a different climate and different activities. And then there's one over here that's completely different than my sandbox. And there's one over here, and we forget that because those sandboxes aren't like ours, that their experiences may be different than ours. Mm-hmm. And they may view the same things and, well, everything must be like this for me too.
Yeah, except there's this weird thing, and I want to get into it a little bit, but I love hearing you tell some of your stories, because there's crazy evidence of God at work in your life, and it's just fun. And in a second, I'm going to ask a specific one, because I love hearing this story. But what you were just saying, there is this evidence of, in some areas, it's very blatant that you live on the other side of the tracks.
Right.
And here are the tracks. Like, we can actually physically see them. Whereas in other areas, the tracks are there, but sometimes they're invisible.
It is interesting to me. When I moved here, I remember I was driving around, getting to know the area. I didn't know much about Sharon, although it was funny that when I decided to move here, and I got ready to move, I talked to several people that I knew who actually knew about Sharon. One kid that I actually grew up with in Florida for years was born and raised in Sharon, born in Sharon. He'd moved to Florida when like the third grade, when I didn't know, and he found out, and so he told me some things. Another person I met through a business contact grew up in Farrell, And so she told me about Farrell. I didn't really know much about him. But I was driving around, and I'm driving up the street, and I hit Division Street.
Hmm.
To this day, because that is pretty much the dividing line between this side of the track and that side. This is Division Street. And I really want to know the history of the naming of that street because it's completely blatant. If you're on this side of Division Street, and if you're on this side, you're, considered a little different. I know there's still racial makeups on both sides, but it's very telling.
Yeah.
But everybody knows that street. And so it's kind of interesting. It's small town. I think some of that is due to small town living in general. I think small towns are small towns.
Mm-hmm.
No matter where you go. I mean, I still consider Winter Haven to be a small town, although it's kind of grown quite a bit. But
Yeah. Well, one of the areas that it's probably one of my favorite stories, and it's definitely evidence of how God has worked in your life, pertains to how you got into school. What were you doing? You were a bouncer.
yeah, so I was always a good student.
Mm-hmm.
School was something that kind of came effortless to me. I was always a reader. I was always doing that sort of thing. And so the idea of going to college was never something that was it wasn't something foreign to me. It was something I wanted to do. I was going to do it, I said I was going to law school since I was 6. And so that was always kind of part of the plan. But I graduated high school, there were some things I didn't know. And so, I'd taken the SAT and I know all these things, but I never really had that conversation with my parents about how we're going to pay for this.
Mm-hmm.
And so that reality hit me really, really hard after I graduated high school that, was how are you going to pay for college, kid?
Mm.
And didn't really know, and didn't know that process at first. And so college for me was a mix of a couple of things. So I took a year off, and I worked. And I remember I worked at JCPenney's, first kind of retail job that I'd had. It wasn't the first job I'd had. And that, working in the linen department, and that solidified one very important thing to me. No matter what, I was going to figure out how to pay for college because I was not working at JCPenney's the rest of my life. And so I survived through that for a little while. But through high school, I was a wrestler and played football. And so when I was about 15, I started working kind of part-time at this teenage nightclub that we had in town. And so I was a bouncer. It was kind of a fun thing. At 15, 16 years old, so this is about the time the movie Roadhouse came out. Okay? And so if you're 15, 16-year-old boy, and you're familiar with this movie Roadhouse, you go, what do you do? I'm a bouncer. And most of us were wrestlers and football players. We had a great time. We go, so let me get this straight. I get paid to stand around, listen to music, talk to girls, and every once in a while I get in a good fight. Sign me up. This was the perfect job. And so I bounced for a number of years. And I actually bounced up until the day before my first day of law school, on and off. But so I finished this job at JCPenney's, and I was bouncing at a jazz club. This was a couple of years after. So let me back up a minute. So I started out at a community college after that year. That came about because I got a choral scholarship. I was always in chorus, always sung in the vocal ensemble, and the director there, Bob Custer, was a friend. One of my best friends had dated his daughter, and someone said, "Hey, Cedric wants to come." Bob said, "Hey, you want to come sing in the choir?" And I said, "Well, I'll come sing." Said, "Well, I got a scholarship for you." "I'm sorry?" Let's go. And so that helped get me through my first 2 years. And so getting ready to go through that. So during that time, I was bouncing at this jazz clubs, kind of jazz and blues club, small place in Lakeland, Florida. And I'd been there for a couple of years. And loved the job. It was very kind of low key. It was a nice high-end place. There was rarely any trouble. I can think of having to actually physically remove 2 people over a number of years, that place. And so I remember I had applied to and gotten into Stetson University, which was well-known college in Florida, upper end. It was expensive. And so I'm fought with this idea again of how do you pay for college. Well, I was a little more familiar at least with financial aid at that point. So I kind of just figured, okay, well, I'm just going to take out whatever loans I need to take. You know, it's a great opportunity. I love this school. Let's go. So I remember it had to be before Christmas because I remember coming into Stetson mid-semester in the January term. So it must have been October-ish, November-ish. I got a phone call. And so back then, did I lose it?
Oh, it's just right there, yeah.
Okay. And so back then, you know, in the olden days, we didn't have a lot of cell phones or anything, but, you know, we had the phone ring in my house, and there's no caller ID. I remember caller ID had just come out, you know, you had the little box at your house. But I get a phone call, and I happen to answer, and the lady goes, I'm looking for Cedric Lewis. And she says, Mr. Lewis, she goes, this is so-and-so. She's, I'm the secretary of Mark Hollis, and he would like to talk to you about Stetson University. I said, oh, okay. I didn't recognize the name at first. I didn't recognize the name for a while. But I said, okay. And my assumption at the time, I remember thinking, oh, this must be an alumni. They found that I've gotten into school, and they just want to, you know, they do a check on local people. And I said, okay, let's set this up. And she goes, well, we'd like you to come by his office and talk to him. And I said, okay. And she gave me the address, and we set up a time, and I kind of hung up. And so I remember, I'm trying to think, did I have a computer then? Did I have a laptop? Maybe I did. I had an old computer. I remember going on MapQuest and typing the address, you know, and pulling out the 10 pages of directions because you had to print out a MapQuest. You didn't have GPS back then. And I put this address. I remember getting the directions, and I went, that's the Publix corporate office. And so Publix grocery stores, if you're from the South, you know Publix. Everyone knows Publix. But Publix was actually started in Winter Haven. The first stores in Winter Haven, and they're based in Lakeland. And so I go, huh, okay, works at Publix. So again, still not thinking much about it, but I'm like, okay. So a week passed, I show up at this meeting, and I go and I drive in, and I'm like, okay. And I remember pulling in the corporate headquarters, I'm looking around, I'm like, huh, it's nice. And I walk up to the receptionist desk, kind of sitting there, and looks down. Can I help you? And she goes, I go, well, I'm here to see Mr. Hollis. And she looked at me. She said, you have an appointment? I said, well, yeah, this is Mark Hollis. Yeah, I'm supposed to be here at whatever it was, 1:30, whatever. She goes, hold on. She gets on the phone. She says, somebody out here. And says, what's your name again? Cedric Lewis is here to see Mr. Hollis. He does? Oh. Okay. I'm like, what is going on? And she goes, well, someone will be right with you. Yeah, well, okay. Lady comes out. Says, Cedric? She goes, yes. I called you. I talked to you on the phone. She says, come on back. She goes, we'll go upstairs. She goes, Mr. Hollis on a phone call. And so I remember she took me to this elevator, and I get on this elevator, and I'm like, where are we going? So push the button, go up a couple of floors, and elevator doors open up. There's this hallway, carpet and mahogany, and it's, you know, you want Steve, oh, you know, I just swore I heard the voices and the lights, and I'm like, where am I? And so we walk down this hallway, and I'm walking, I'm looking at name tags, and I see vice president of this, and see, where are we going? And we go into the office, and outer office, and I look at the name tags. It's Mark Hollis, is president. And I went, this guy's the president of Publix. What in the world? What does he want? And so we go into the outer office, and it's her, the receptionist there. She'll come in right after he gets on the phone. And I'm sitting out there just kind of sweating bullets, like this is you know, this is kind of a big wig around here. I don't know who this. Yeah. He comes out, Nicest guy I've ever met. Cedric, how you doing? And he goes, good to see you again. And I went, again? Pulls me in the office and we're talking. And, yeah, sit. He must have saw the bewilderment on my face. And he goes, you don't remember me, do you? I go, I'm sorry, sir, I don't. We've met? He goes, yeah. He goes, listen. He goes, I come to Traders all the time. He goes, I see you nearly every week, sometimes a couple of times a week. And he goes, I'm a friend of Dean's. It was the guy who owned the place. And he said, he says, yeah. He says, I was talking to Dean one day, and I was talking about you. He says, I told Dean, I asked Dean, I said, who's the big guy at the door? He goes, he's trying to come in. He says, he's got a book, and he's always reading or studying or something. And Dean told me who you were. And he says, and he mentioned that you had been accepted and you were heading off to Stetson University. I said, well, yes, sir. He goes, well, I went to Stetson. I went, oh, okay. That's cool. And so we sat, we chit-chatted for a while. We talked about the school and some of the goals and, what are you going to do and what are the things? I said, well, I like to law school and do some other things. Oh. He goes, that's really interesting. He goes, Cedric, he goes, I like you. Okay. Like you too, sir. Nice guy. And so he picks up the phone, makes a phone call, and I'm sitting there, and he says, yes, he goes, can I speak to, so I can't even remember the name now. She goes, yeah. He goes, yep. Tell her it's Mark Hollis. Yep. Yeah. Hey. It's listen. She goes, I got a young man here in my office. He's coming in winter term, and his name's Cedric Lewis. He's coming and says, yeah. She goes, yep. Yeah. Listen, I want him to have one. Yeah. No. Oh. Well, yeah. No. Listen, we'll figure it out. We'll do it. Yeah. And he turns around and he goes, Cedric, what's your Social Security number? Excuse me, strange white man? What? What's your Social Security number? And so I gave it to him reluctantly, but I'm like, oh, okay. He's a millionaire. What's he going to do with my Social Security number? So I hear him repeat on the phone. He says, yep. He goes, yep. Listen, I'll talk to you later. We'll figure it out. Yep. Okay, good to talk to you. I hang up the phone. I have no clue what just happened. Mm-hmm. Cedric, he goes, I tell you what, he goes, you're a good kid, I like you. He says, I think you're gonna have a great future, you're gonna do some things. He goes, listen, I gotta go a meeting, this is great talking to you. He goes, I want you to enjoy Stetson. He goes, maybe I'll see you around. And that was the end of the meeting. I go, this is what just happened? And so life goes on, and a couple months later, it's, January term, and I'm on Stetson's campus, and I get there and I move in. And I kind of got settled in my dorm, and I go, okay, I got to go to financial aid and sign all my paperwork and get all this stuff going. So I go down there, and I remember I got there and I announced, my name's Cedric Lewis, and, transfer, and I need to fill out all my loan paperwork. And she looks up, confused, you're Cedric. Yeah, that's what I just said. She goes, hold on, Tony. She goes, Tony wants to talk to you. I go, who's Tony? She goes, head of financial aid. I just got here. What did I do? Tony comes out, black lady, I love her to death. She's hilarious. So you're Cedric? Yeah. What'd I do? She's like, nothing. She goes, come back here. Let's talk. And she comes in, she goes, so Cedric, she goes, how do you know Mark Hollis? The weird white guy. I go, well, I don't really know him. I said, here, and I tell her the story, and she goes, well, that was me who was talking to you on the phone. I go, okay, why did he talk to you on the phone? She goes, well, listen. She goes, Mark Hollis went to Stetson, and his family went to Stetson. Did he tell you? I said, yeah, he told me he went to Stetson. And she said, it's a little more than that. She said, he didn't tell you anything else? I said, no. She says, well, Mark's family's gone to the school for a number of generations now. So his mother's father went here, grandparents. I said, oh. She goes, have you been to your dorm yet, Cedric? I said, well, yeah. She goes, what dorm you live in? I said, oh, well, I'm in, and I had to look it up. And I went, oh, I live in Hollis Hall. She went, she said, when you look out your window, she says, there's a fountain in the center of campus. You can see it from your window in the middle of campus. Big, she saw all the pictures and all the. I said, yeah, I saw that. It's really neat. She goes, yeah. She goes, that's Hollis Fountain. I go, she goes. And she goes, back behind here is Mary Hollis Hall, and that's the girls' dorm, and this and that. And she starts naming off a bunch of these things. Over there is the Hollis Athletic Center, and she goes, yeah, they've been here a number of years. I said, oh. She goes, did he tell you he's the chairman of the board of trustees? I said, no. And she goes, well, we have this thing here. She says the Hollis Leadership Scholarship. She goes, we give out, I think it was like 6 of them a year. And she goes, yeah. She goes, and so Mark Fonse says, students that have leadership potential, and so they give out the scholarships. I said, yeah. She says, Mark called me that day and says she wanted you to have one. I said, really? I said, so I got a scholarship? And she goes, no. That was Tony, seriously. She said, no. She goes, I told Mark that day we'd already awarded all the scholarships for the year. Mm-hmm. I said, oh, okay. You should have led with that. But, yeah. All right, let me sign these loan papers then. What am I doing? She goes, no. She goes, I don't understand. She goes, Mark was really adamant that you received this. She goes, I got a note that says he wrote a personal check to cover your tuition. I think at times like $60,000 for the next couple of years or whatever it was. But I was like, she says, so you're the first and only recipient of the Hollis grant. I said, he did what? She goes, yeah. She goes, I just assumed you had to know him or something. And she goes, huh. And so I left there, totally bewildered. Now, I still had some residual stuff, but I think it paid for 3/4 of school. Mm-hmm. But I left totally just like, what just happened? And so several months later, I remember sitting on campus and saw a sign that says trustees here. There was a trustees meeting. And so I remember going, wow, maybe I'm going to see this guy. And finally I see him walking from one building to the other. Mr. Hollis. Do you remember? He goes, Cedric, how you doing? I'm like, I'm great. How are you? What do I kiss your ring? What do I do? He kind of laughed. I was like, I said, thank you. I don't know what else to say. How can I repay you? And he just said, Cedric, he goes, I told you. He says, I see something and you think you're going to do something. He says, if anything, he says, I just want you to pass it on. Yes, sir. And so I didn't run into him anymore than the time I was there, so I would graduate. And I went on to law school and came back, and I came back to Winter Haven. And so the law firm that I ultimately ended up working for was one of the oldest firms in the county, very prestigious, as I told you, a lot of high-end clients, especially locally. And so probably a year later, I remember being at an award ceremony banquet we were at, and black tie affair, and I see him across the room. He's there. And I look, and he looks at me, and you could see the recognition, and he kind of looked, and he just kind of nodded at me. And that was it. And I didn't see him anymore. I knew he retired, from the company several years ago, and then several years ago he passed away. I remember just kind of being a little shook. I was like, I don't really know this man. As I read some things, I knew that the families were known for being very philanthropic and doing some other things. But I said, this guy kind of changed a large part of my life. Mm-hmm. Because he saw something in me. And so that was always a moving thing. And so when I tell that story to students and I talk to other people, like kids, I go, the thing of it is this. I said, one of the things he said to me, he says, I saw you all this time. He says, you're always studying, you're always working, but you're always very polite. Because you're always treated everybody the same. You're always very, and he said, and so that was something that stood out. And so I always tell people, I said, you don't know who's watching you or why people are putting your life or in your path or what, but I said the best thing you can always do is to treat people the way you want to be treated. And so it's a kind of an even-headed thing there. And I said, and I'm not saying these things, but I said, but there's purpose behind all of that. And so for me, that was one of those big lessons. And the other thing about that is now when I got into teaching and doing some other things that I do or try to spend some time with younger kids or educating people, I'm trying to remember doing what he asked me to do and kind of pass it on, you know. And while I may not be able to go and write a check to pay for someone's college, I pray one day I would love to be able to do that other than my own kids. There are some things that I can pass on and knowledge-wise. And so I've been blessed with a life that's been full of kind of experiences that I didn't understand at the time. Didn't really make a lot of sense. Some of them seemed really, really random. But it gave me a life full of experience and knowledge and I hope a little bit of wisdom that I could pass on to others. And that's why I got into teaching probably 20, 25 years sooner than I expected to ever do it. But it's because I learned to kind of follow God's path and, the one that he laid out for me versus the one that I kind of saw, and it paid dividends. It gave me experiences and lessons that I could pass on and that I felt like I needed to pass on to other people. And so that was all a part of that. And I think that's just my biggest lesson, I think, more than anything, is following God's path.
Yeah, I love that story because God has been at work in your life, your whole life, and there are not always times that we notice that when God's at work. And so the reason I'm asking Cedric these questions is just because when we get to know people, then it's easier to have the harder conversations. There's a weird narrative at play right now around our country, and there's actually multiple narratives going on when it comes to the protests and when it comes to the riots, and a lot of it is coming from just ignorance.
Yeah. I think that's right. A lot of it is uninformed. People simply aren't informed. Somewhere along the line, we stop looking and digging. I said, and it's crazy. In an age and a time where we have more access to more information than we've ever had in our lives, we've lost the ability to sort through information, to actually look and research and study and dig and stop taking single sources. I remember being a kid and going to the library and, the Dewey Decimal System was my Google. Right? And you wrote a research paper, you had to have at least 5 sources, and so you went to all these things, you read and you did, and then this one referenced that when you went and we checked. And we grew up in that generation of doing that. And now I can do that with a couple of keystrokes. But I'd rather only listen to what someone on CNN said or what someone on Fox News said or what someone on this said, and that's got to be it, the end all, and I don't want to go look for anything else. And so I tie my whole belief system, everything I'm supposed to know about the world or path based on a narrative that someone else painted for me. And I didn't check anything out for myself. And so I think about that as a kid growing up in the church and growing up, I remember being, 8, 9, and to this day, I caught myself the other day singing it's not really a song, but it was a lesson that we used to learn in church as a way of teaching us scriptures. And I caught myself even now at 47 singing that thing. It was repetitive thing. And so there were belief systems that were put into me as a child that this person said it, so this must be true. And as I got older and I hit my teenage years and I started to read a little bit for myself, I started to study a little bit for myself, and I go, well, I've heard this passage means this all these years, but I said, I'm reading this now and it's almost like I'm reading it for the first time, and I don't see this way. Because when I look at this scripture above it, I look at this section behind it, I look at this facts behind it and do some research, the context isn't right, and so this looks this way.
Yeah.
And so we do that now with news, and a lot of us still do that with our theology too. We've stopped reading and stopped studying and stopped looking for ourselves, And so we come up with answers and bad theology, in some cases dangerous theology. And we try to apply it to our everyday lives as though that is the true word of God, and it's created a problem.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the narratives at play right now, and it's really been at play for decades, is inner city African Americans killing African Americans, and people are bringing that up right now, and it's painful when we're missing this real narrative where you have George, who died a couple weeks ago. What was the woman's name who died like a week earlier?
So Aubrey, so you got Aubrey Adams, and there's so many of them now.
Oh yeah, but like in a 3-week window, there were
Yeah.
3 people.
Right, and over the narrative, there's 6 or 7. I looked at a list. Someone showed me a picture of a list, and it was like 16 over the last 5 or 6 days. And some of those names, I go, I forgot about that one. And oh yeah, now that you say that, I do remember that one. And as scary as all those names are, the fact that you didn't remember all of them was even scarier to me. Because it's become so common and you go, oh, another one. And so when you do that for only so long, you hit a favorite pitch. At some point, as I said, it had to explode.
And we've watched it explode multiple
And that's-
times. We had, was it Baltimore a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
We had Dallas. Now we have really the country. I mean, Seattle's been taken over by
Right.
some people.
And you're seeing it. You're seeing it all over the world now, and that's the thing. And on one hand, I was a little surprised when I saw it, hitting Amsterdam and hitting it. And I had a good conversation with a business partner, one of my good friends, who was born in the Netherlands, who lived in Amsterdam, and he was just incensed that this protest were going on in Amsterdam. We're not like that. We're not like that. And I said, Michael, and I get it. I said, he and I went to Amsterdam on a business trip not a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, and he wanted to take me for years. And so he's one of these people that I get to have those hard conversations with, because although he's been in the U.S. for 20 years, his upbringing was mostly in Europe and some in Canada, and so he didn't look at race the same way we looked at race, because culturally they don't. And he says, I want you to see this. He says, you won't understand it till I say it. And I remember going and walking through parts of Europe, through Sweden and then into Amsterdam, and I could see it and I could feel it. It was different, and it was the little things that you do. And I keep saying, we talk about experiences and changes things. And so my experience with Michael was that, I remember going when we were in Sweden, in Stockholm. I remember walking through a affluent neighborhood. I told him, I said, I'm going to go for a walk. And so I walked down, and I remember going through financial district and into a residential neighborhood, just kind of looking at architecture. I really wasn't paying much attention to where I was wandering. But I'm walking around, and I started to think, and as I passed various people, I passed a number of white people. How you doing? And mothers and nannies and a group of kids and several police officers, and hi, how you doing? And I continued to walk, and they continued to walk. And I remember I got to a river or something. I stopped and I looked back at the path that I'd just been through. I said, I just walked through a neighborhood, $1 million homes, and interact with various people. And I said, that never would have happened in the United States. That's not because I think of the United States. My experience has shown me. I would have been stopped and stared at, and those police officers, at least one or two of them, would have stopped and said, what are you doing here? And can I help you? Or, let's point you in the right direction there. What do you're out of place. Nobody blinked an eye. And I remember sitting and having dinner. We'd been to dinner for several nights, and typically, because Michael has the company credit card, he normally pays dinner deal. But I remember sitting a couple of nights before we left, and someone handed me the bill, and that had happened several times, and I took the bill and handed it to him, and I said, Michael. He said, yeah. I go, He said, no, you don't really notice this stuff. I said, I didn't really notice it too. I said, but, you know, more people have handed me the check in the last week. I said, you and I have been to dinner 100 times over the last, I said, in the U.S. I said, can you ever think of a time where you and I were together at a nice restaurant or something like that, and someone just handed me the bill and not you? He goes, well, no, you're right. I said, well, you're going to pay this bill. But still, it's just the principle of the thing. That here, it wasn't an unusual thing. Mm-hmm. And so that made an impression on me, though. Because the mindset was, these are just two guys, and I don't know this could be anybody. But it's something that here in the U.S. we subconsciously go on. Because I can go out to dinner with him here, and they always hand him the check. And if I went to dinner with my wife the other night, another couple, and the one couple said, it could be a number of factors, but one couple said, we were on one check, and so the assumption was, my wife and I were on the other check, and they came back and they brought 3 checks. They brought one for the couple, they brought one for my wife, and they brought one for me. Mm. And I kind of laughed, and my wife looked at me, and she laughed, and I handed her the waitress, I said, don't cheat me out of a deal. My wife said she's paying for dinner, and I let her pay for it, and she went, but those are common things. And growing up as an attorney, I was a member of a country club, and I said, I think for the first 2 months I was there, and it just so happened that I was a business attorney in the business I was in, and most of my clients happened to be white males. And so whenever I would go to the country club for dinner, the first 2 months, they would always hand the bill to be signed to my clients, most of which weren't members of that country club. I was. But I was the first one, and they weren't used to that. Mm-hmm. The only other black people in that club worked there. And in fact, as a youth, my grandfather worked as a janitor. And so it took a staff meeting with the club manager and all the staff to identify who I was and that I was in fact a member and that they had to treat me a certain way. And so I saw this total turnaround, after this meeting that they had, and they knew who I was and what I drank and what my kids liked and but it had to be pointed out. Mm-hmm. This is 2000, 2001. It had to be pointed out. And so now you still see these things. And, my wife, I think maybe less here in the smaller town, but in certain areas, and they go, your husband's black. Well, he's an attorney. I was with my kid's mom the other night. She brought that up to my daughter. She said, how that made me feel. The fact that I had to qualify. That, yeah, okay, but he's okay because he's an attorney. Mm-hmm. And not just he's a black male. And so you can think about some of those things, but as I said, I started to think about that. How many times have I had to qualify my opinion with, I have a law degree. Now, what I said didn't change between when you knew I had a law degree and when I didn't, but certainly it was given credence. Or the way I'm treated, if I'm dressed extremely, casual right now because it's comfortable, mm-hmm. right? But I can go into a store, and in fact, we did this experiment. Michael and I, we first had our first conversation about racism. I go, you don't notice these things? He says, let me show you something. I said, let's go to this store that we went to we frequented, high-end department store we went to 4 or 5 times a week. And I would go there and I'd buy a tie or buy a shirt or buy something. It was common, and the salespeople knew me. But they also knew me in a jacket, shirt and tie, maybe at least a shirt and a jacket. I said, I want to show you something. So I remember I went in one day, and the guy behind the counter was one who served me a lot and he knew me, should know me on sight. But today I wore something casual. I wore a hoodie. I didn't say anything to him. And I walked in, I walked around, and I'm watching, and I had Michael over on the side. I said, watch this. And he starts to follow me. And he recognized me. He comes over and, sir, how can I help you? I said, oh, nothing. I'm just browsing. Died the day before I bought something from. $100 or so. Well, our clearance rack's over here. Let me come show you this. And so it was completely different. And so I left a couple moments. And I could feel it, but Michael told me, because he was watching us, he watched you until you walked out that door. And so maybe an hour or so later, I came back in. And this time in a pair of jeans and a shirt and a jacket, the way I normally look. Before I could get halfway across the room, Mr. Lewis, how you doing?
By name.
What can I help you with? What can I get you today? Hey, we've got some great new suits over here. Completely different demeanor. I was the same guy, had the same ID, had the same credit card and money in my pocket that I did an hour ago. But because I was comfortable or didn't fit that look or mold that made him feel comfortable, I guess, I don't know. The treatment was completely different. And these are the subtle things that we don't know. They're the things that black people notice all the time because it becomes part of our everyday life. Mm-hmm. And I said, it's scary sometimes, the things you get used to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of the protests going on internationally right now, especially when you just told your story of being over there. And what we're actually seeing is internationally, they're showing unity with those in this country who are being judged, who are being persecuted.
Right. And so it's an interesting time because this could be another one of those moments of great change in this country. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And much needed change. And we can complain and say, well, it's too late. But it needs to be changed. And so if this drives change, it sparks awareness, then I think it's for the good. As I told you, when I think back over the major historical changes, it took some drastic spark for people to go and realize this is something that's important. This is something that we need to look at, right? And so I look at it and people go, well, we don't need all the rioting, we don't need all the looting, but we don't need to show that we're oppressed. But that's what the Boston Tea Party was.
Exactly. Well, actually, exactly. As a guy from Boston, amen to the Tea Party. We'd rather drink coffee. But I was listening to a discussion pretty much, and it went down this path briefly when it comes to the riots. And the guy who's on this podcast like every week asked the guest, if African Americans really wanted to join in with us, we wouldn't have rioting, to which the guest responded, so you're telling me to wait a little longer. It seems to me that truly if we want to have reconciliation, and as Christians, as brothers and sisters, like, we should be desiring to seek reconciliation. We shouldn't be watching the international community trying to bring justice in an area where there's injustice. We should be desiring to seek racial reconciliation. But first and foremost, we need to realize that there's been decades, if not centuries, of injustice done on brothers and sisters in this country, on Americans. And as Christians, we should realize there's been decades, if not centuries, of injustice done on our own brothers and sisters right here. We pride ourselves on sending money to missionaries. We pride ourselves on praying for people overseas in areas where they're being persecuted, but we turn a blind eye in our own country to brothers and sisters being persecuted. And yes, there are some factions that are not godly. They're divisive, that are coming in, starting some of these riots up.
Right. And that's one part of it. And so we have to separate. I don't know how many times the last couple weeks ago, well, wait a minute. There are people who are protesting that are protesting. Protesters are protesting, looters are looting. Mm-hmm. And we don't separate. We have to separate those two actions. But it's easier for us to throw those two together so that we can ignore the cause. Well, now I don't have to listen to you because they're doing something that I don't agree with. Well, they're doing something I don't agree with either, but that doesn't change my plight.
No, it doesn't change. And what we've seen is this plate's there, and then we use the riots in Dallas or the riots in Baltimore. Wasn't it St. Louis as well, in Seattle, and the whole country right now? We use those riots to turn a blind eye to the injustice that's happening right now.
But then we do that because we don't talk about the same riot. What was it? A couple of years ago, there was the riot because the football team lost the national championship, and wait a minute, we can riot and loot and cause these crazy things over sporting events and things that didn't have any real impact on anyone's freedom or rights, but
my boys in Boston, every time we win a World Series or a championship, we are flipping cars and lighting stuff on fire.
And we see that thing, oh, they're just being silly. And well, wait a minute. It has to take that type of action on our hand to get, when we talk about, we're talking about civil rights, so you talk about, we love to quote Dr. King, and well, Dr. King didn't have to do all this writing and looting. And I said, well, there are 2 points that people say. Number one, you killed Dr. King. And number two, it was after his assassination that you had rioting and you had looting and people standing up and going, look at this man who did all these things peacefully, and you still killed him. It took those riots and protests for there to be action for the civil rights movement, law to be put into place. Mm-hmm. It took a Boston Tea Party. It took a revolution for some to go, no, we're not going to accept life like this. We have different ideals. Yeah. And Civil War and other things they're doing that. I said no, and I get it. I had a discussion with someone about the Civil War the other day. I said we all agreed that the Civil War needed to be fought, that it was an important issue. But there were deaths during the Civil War. There was destruction during the Civil War. There was fires and cities burned and things. Should not those battles have been fought? Mm-hmm. We sympathize with the loss. We get it. We see it. And what I don't see on as many of the news stations are the people who are starting to fight it. I don't see as much on the news the people who are denouncing it, those people who are protesting. No, this is what we came here for. Mm-hmm. You're hijacking the cause.
Yeah.
But should we not have fought those things and helped those people rebuild if for the greater good of this is the issue that we're here for? Because we've tried to talk about this in the past. We talk about all the changes that the life of Dr. King made, and there were many. But we also know that 30, 40 years later, we're still fighting about the same thing.
We're still fighting about the same thing, and we're emulating Dr. King, but if Dr. King were alive today, we'd hate him.
Well, exactly.
Because he'd be a socialist, he'd be a Marxist.
And at the height of his importance, Dr. King, a Malcolm X, a Muhammad Ali, all these people that I hear, people of all nations don't say, oh, this person was my idol, and they did this, they did this. When they were saying the things that they said, I read an article, so they were the top 5 most hated people in the country then. Mm-hmm. But we consider them heroes now, looking back. And so I don't know what, my grandkids are going to think of this time, or I have a 9-month-old. What's going to be life like when he's in high school and studying the history of this? Mm-hmm. I hope it's not a situation where he's, again, having the same conversation, or I'm having the same conversation with him that I have with his older brothers and sisters now about racial reconciliation. I hope it's not a repeat of that.